You know what really sucks? Working on a fucking Tuesday, man. Honestly, I had a really long work week. I'm sure many of you have. Um, and I waited until this past Sunday to do my research for this episode, which means I'm recording this on a Tuesday after work, which really sucks, but I have a lot of rage and I feel like I need that for this episode. um So I guess yeah, hi everybody, what's up? Welcome to episode 4 of Meet Me at Midnight. I am really excited because in my head it is officially spooky season. I spent almost this entire weekend DIYing Halloween decorations. So like I painted signs and other decorations to put around the house, and then I made little skeleton fairies to go with my Akatar books. And then I made potions too, which was super fun. I've never made potions before, and I was enlightened. And I will definitely be doing more. Which, honestly, that's exactly what I needed before this episode, because researching this episode was rough. We are about to start a very dark and disturbing journey today. I thought about waiting a little bit longer to do this one, but I don't know. I felt right doing it this week. So I have a true crime case. This is about the 16-year-old Sylvia Likens. If you have heard of it, you know what I'm talking about when I say this is going to be dark. So let's get into it, guys. Sylvia came from a very large and poor family in Boone County, Indiana. Her father was Lester Likens, and he had an 8th grade education and worked a lot of different jobs, like odd and end jobs to make a living. So he had a laundry route, he worked in factories, owned a small, unsuccessful restaurant, and he also traveled with carnivals selling food from a concessions cart. And the summer of 1965, Lester Likens decided to travel with the carnival for work. And then on July 3rd, the kid's mom, Elizabeth or Betty, was arrested and jailed for shoplifting. This is important to know because dad's going to work, mom's been arrested, so their kids, they need to find someone to watch their children. So there are 5 Likens children. Diana, who was grown and married, Danny, who is Diana's twin brother, Benny, who with his brother Danny stayed with their grandparents. So Danny and Benny stayed with their grandparents, and then that left the 2 girls, Sylvia and Jenny. So Jenny is Benny's twin. She was a shy kid who limped from childhood polio. And then Sylvia is the middle child between the 2 sets of twins and was a 16-year-old confident teenager who went by the nickname Cookie. She was really pretty and always smiled with her mouth closed because she had a missing front tooth. So, introducing the big bad of this story, Gertrude Banaszewski. God, I don't know. But at the time, her name was Gertrude Wright. She was born September 19th, 1828 in Indianapolis to Molly Myrtle and Hugh Fossman. I don't know why it was so hard to say Indianapolis. I'm sorry. I think my brain's just fried from today. She was the 3rd of 6 children in a working class family. She watched her father die of a heart attack at 11. And then 6 years later, she dropped out of high school to marry John Banaszewski. He was an extremely volatile man and beat Gertrude. And despite the abuse, they were married for 10 years and had 4 children together. And then she divorced him. Shortly after, Gertrude married Edward Guthrie, who their marriage only lasted for 3 months before she divorced him too. And ended up remarrying John Banaszewski again. And then during that second marriage between the 2 of them, they had 2 more children before they divorced for the second and final time in 1963. A few weeks after divorcing her ex-husband for the second time, the 35-year-old Gertrude began her relationship with 20-year-old Dennis Wright. He also physically abused her, and they had a son, which shortly after the birth of their son, Dennis left Gertrude. She was a very haggard, underweight woman who suffered from asthma due to years of chain smoking, and she also suffered clinical depression from her failed marriages and a recent miscarriage. To make her income, she would sew or do cleaning for neighbors and acquaintances, but she would mostly survive on the checks that she received from her first husband, John, to care for the kids, which were few and far between. So Gertrude lived in a big rented home and had 7 children of her own, 6 from her ex-husband and 1 from Wright. So Paula is 17, John was 12, Stephanie was 15. When I'm saying this was in 1965, so this is their ages for the purpose of the story. Marie was 11, Shirley was 10, James was 8. Those are the Baniszewski children. And then Dennis Wright Jr. is 1. The Likens girls knew of Gertrude because they went to school with her daughters, Paula and Stephanie. So she said that she would watch Sylvia and Jenny for $20 a week while Lester Likens was traveling with the carnival to earn money. And I never understood this. Like, I don't know why the fuck the girls couldn't have gone to their grandparents too, like the boys did. But literally none of this shit would have happened if they had gone to their grandparents too. I don't know why they couldn't, but they didn't. From the very beginning, there was kind of a clash between the 2 teenage girls, Paula and Sylvia, but otherwise they were pretty much treated like part of the family. So if you think like basic like teenager like rivalry, you know, everybody wants to be the top dog. And that was until 2 weeks after the girls moved in. The money order from Lester Likens didn't show up when Gertrude was expecting it. And Jenny, Sylvia's sister, later had testified that Gertrude said, "Well, I took care of you 2 bitches for a week for nothing," when that money order didn't come in. The next day, the money order did end up coming in, so a day late, but the damage had already been done. So we start kind of getting into how Gertrude would punish the girls. Again, she was really frail and underweight, but she had 2 weapons that she used often for punishing Sylvia and Jenny. She used a thick wooden paddle, like the ones you see like sororities decorate, you know, and then a thick leather belt, like police issue belt. And then from here on out, it's really dark shit. So if you are weak-stomached or just do not want to be really disturbed, this is your one and only warning. I honestly had a really hard time researching this because it's just so vile. But here we go. So the abuse and methods of torture focused mostly on Sylvia from here on. Some was a little bit for Jenny, but Sylvia became the main target. So Gertrude would use the paddle on Sylvia and Jenny for various offenses, like exchanging bottles for change at the grocery store. And then when she thought Sylvia was stealing from her, she burned her fingers with matches. And sometimes Gertrude was too weak to discipline them, so her oldest daughter Paula would take her place as the abuser. And then Sylvia would be beat and starved or forced to eat spoiled food from garbage cans, which is foul. And then the abuse escalated when Sylvia claimed that she had a boyfriend who lived in Long Beach, who she had met earlier that year in the spring of 1965. Gertrude asked her if she'd ever done anything with a boy, and Sylvia had replied, like, "I guess so," and said that she'd been to the park with the boys before. So, like, which is so innocent. She's like, "I mean, I guess I've done something with boys before. Like, I've gone to the park with them." But, like, obviously she had no idea what the fuck Gertrude meant. Like, Gertrude thought she was, like, sleeping with them. Gertrude asked, rewind. Sylvia had also mentioned that she laid underneath covers with her boyfriend to Stephanie and Jenny, and Gertrude had overheard. So several days later, Gertrude said to Sylvia that she was certainly getting a big stomach. "It looks like you're going to have a baby." And Sylvia thought she was joking, obviously, and said that she would have to go on a diet because she just thought she meant that she was getting fat. But Gertrude told Sylvia and the other girls in the house that if they laid with a boy that they would fall pregnant. And then she turned to Sylvia and kicked her in the genitals. And then Paula, Gertrude's 17-year-old daughter, who was also pregnant at the time, participated in the attack. So for saying that she slept in a bed with a boy, she got kicked in the genitals by an old woman and a 17-year-old girl who was 3 months pregnant. So another instance of abuse was Paula and a neighborhood boy, Randy Lepper, force-fed Sylvia a hot dog that she vomited up and then was forced to eat the vomit. Yeah. I think that would just make me vomit again. It'd just be like a never-ending cycle. And then, in retaliation to her abuse, Sylvia spread a rumor that Stephanie and Paula were prostitutes. So, when Stephanie was jokingly propositioned at school, the boy told her that Sylvia had started the rumor. When they returned to the house, Stephanie questioned Sylvia, who admitted to starting the rumor, and then Stephanie punched Sylvia in retaliation. And then Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, heard of the rumor as well. He slapped Sylvia, beat her head against the wall, and flipped her backwards onto the floor. And then, honestly, just keeps getting worse the more people that find out. And then Gertrude found out and beat her with a paddle. And then Paula joined in on the abuse and beat her with such force that Paula herself broke her wrist. And after getting her wrist taken care of and casted, Paula would use her casted hand to continue beating Sylvia. Then Gertrude made Jenny, Sylvia's little sister, hit her as well, or she would suffer the abuse too, which I don't think anybody could ever convince me to hit my sister, but I think if it was me or my sister, I would tell them to hit me. I don't know if Sylvia had actually said anything, but as an older sister, I think she would have. And then it gets even worse. The other children from the neighborhood began coming to the Baniszewski home to participate in the torture as well. So at this point, there really wasn't any rhyme or reason for the abuse. They all just wanted to do it. Any excuse to abuse Sylvia, they found. And I, for one, for the life of me, I cannot understand how this wasn't reported to the police. But Coy Hubbard, Stephanie's boyfriend, and some of the other classmates in the neighborhood would come over and practice their judo on Sylvia. So they would hurl her against walls, lacerate her body. They would also extinguish cigarettes on her skin and would severely injure her genitals, kicking, punching, all of that. They never actually raped her, but they did, externally, abuse the area. Then, as Gertrude, Jenny, and some of the other teenagers from the neighborhood watched, Sylvia was forced to undress in the living room and insert a Pepsi Cola bottle into her vagina and masturbate. Remember, she is 16 years old. She's frankly very innocent at this point. So, to be forced to do that was, I can't even imagine. Honestly makes me ill saying it. It eventually got to a point where Sylvia wasn't allowed to attend school because she confessed to stealing gym clothes since Gertrude wouldn't buy any clothes for her. So Gertrude, in retaliation, beat Sylvia with a leather belt as punishment and burnt her fingertips with a match for stealing. And then a few days later, Jenny was also beat with a belt for stealing a tennis shoe for her one good foot. The two sisters didn't tell anybody what was happening because they thought things would get worse, and they were also isolated from their parents who wouldn't visit often and couldn't visit often. And the very last time that they saw them was on October 5th, 1965. So the two sisters had never showed any signs of distress to their parents since Gertrude was kind of hovering near them, or nearby while these visits were occurring. So, once the parents left, things would only get worse for them, so I think they were afraid to say something. Sylvia and Jenny had also run into Diana, their older sister, a few weeks prior to that visit with their parents on the 5th in a park with 11-year-old Marie Baniszewski. And Sylvia had mentioned that she was hungry, and Diana gave her a sandwich. And then Marie told Gertrude, who accused Sylvia of gluttony before choking her, and with the help of Paula, putting Sylvia in a scorching hot bath to, quote, cleanse her of her sins. This is how hot the bath was. So Sylvia would pass out from the heat and the pain, and Gertrude would bang her head against the tub to wake her up. So, I mean, at this point, it's been basically since July to this point, we're in October. She's been being beat and abused, like mentally and physically. Like, you can only imagine like what she looked like at this point, what her psyche was like. And then a few weeks after the incident, Jamie and Sylvia encountered Diane in the park again and told her of the abuse, and she just thought they were exaggerating, which is just another instance where somebody could have said something, somebody could have believed them, and nothing would have happened. But Diane had discovered where the girls were living and attempted to see them, but Gertrude refused to let her in and said that she didn't have permission to be there. And then Diane, by chance, encountered Jenny outside of the house on a different day and asked how Sylvia was doing, and Jenny said that she couldn't tell her or she'd get into trouble. So now we're on to the annoying part, which is everybody who failed to report and the reports that failed. So a father in the neighborhood called Arsenal Technical High School, where Sylvia and the girls attended, and anonymously reported that Sylvia was living with open sores all over her body at the Baniszewski house. The school nurse came by to check in on her, and Gertrude hid her in the basement and told her that Sylvia had run away and was, quote, out of control. She also said that the sores were from her refusing to keep personal hygiene, and the nurse believed Gertrude, and it was left at that and was not investigated further. And then one of their neighbors was actually aware of the abuse as well, but never reported anything. And then, I mean, I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but again, like, it just keeps getting worse. It doesn't get better. It just gets worse. But Gertrude would tell the other kids that Sylvia was insulting them, trying to provoke them to attack her as well. And due to the frequency and brutality of the attacks that Sylvia suffered, she became incontinent. So for anybody who doesn't know that, she wets herself. So as punishment for wetting herself, Sylvia was thrown into the basement and tied up there on October 6th. And she essentially remained in that basement until she died. She was tied to the railing of the stairs to the basement, naked, feet barely touching the ground, and was rarely fed and deprived of water. The kids in the neighborhood would pay 5 cents to Gertrude to come to the basement and see Sylvia and abuse her. And then throughout her captivity, Sylvia would be forced into scalding hot baths where Gertrude and the children would rub salt into her open wounds. One time, Gertrude and John, who is 12 years old at the time, rubbed urine and feces from Gertrude's 1-year-old son's diaper in Sylvia's mouth and told her that that's all she was allowed to eat and drink for the day. And then Gertrude had told Sylvia that she could sleep upstairs on the condition that she controlled her bladder. So, like I said before, like, she'd been down in the basement for a while. The only thing she'd really been fed was piss and shit. Like, straight up, that's what they fed her, rarely. So she suffered severe dehydration, and when she was allowed to go upstairs that one night, she convinced Jenny to sneak her a cup of water. And then when Sylvia woke up, she saw that she had wet the bed, and Gertrude forced Sylvia, as punishment, to insert an empty Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina in front of all the kids, and then was taken back to the basement. Later, Sylvia was forced into the kitchen, where Gertrude began branding Sylvia with a heated needle. The brand said, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." Gertrude couldn't finish, so one of the neighbors, 14-year-old Richard Hobbs, finished the branding for her. To further the humiliation, Gertrude invited the neighborhood kids over to look at Sylvia and told them it happened to her at a sex party. The following day after branding her, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter addressed to her parents saying that she ran away because the local boys were beating her. And then on October 25th, Sylvia, which is not too long after she wrote the letter, on October 25th, Sylvia attempted to escape the basement after overhearing that the family's plan was to abandon Sylvia in the woods to die. So, I mean, her condition was horrible at this point. Like, there was a high chance that she was going to die, like, pretty soon. So they were putting in kind of like a fail-safe, like, plan to, like, how to get rid of her body so that nobody gets in trouble. Unfortunately, she was not able to escape because she was in such a bad, weak condition. She was obviously still kept in the basement. Gertrude had tried to force feed Sylvia crackers on a couple occasions, but she was too dehydrated to swallow them. When she couldn't swallow them, one time Gertrude beat her face with a curtain rod so hard that it bent. And then Coy Hubbard, Stephanie's boyfriend at the time, also helped with this when Gertrude got tired until Sylvia passed out. She screamed for help for hours in that basement, and after Sylvia's death, a neighbor had later reported that she had heard the screaming, but didn't report it because it had stopped at 3 a.m. Such a fucking idiot. I don't know if at this point Sylvia could have been saved because she was already in such horrible condition, but I mean, it's the see something, say something for me, you know? Anyways, the following morning, after being beat with a curtain rod and screaming for help for hours, Sylvia could no longer use her body or speak properly. She was incoherent and delirious and could no longer eat. When Gertrude tried to feed her and failed, she would further abuse Sylvia, making her condition even worse. Richard Hobbs had also returned. He was the one that helped brand her. Richard Hobbs had returned to the household and immediately went down the basement to torment Sylvia. And he found Stephanie Banazuski down there sobbing while cradling Sylvia in her arms. Stephanie didn't really partake in the abuse. It was only that one time that she punched Sylvia. But she was, according to reports, she was remorseful for punching Sylvia when Sylvia had spread the rumor about her and Paula being prostitutes. So Sylvia was down there crying, or Stephanie was down there crying and cradling Sylvia in her arms when Richard Hobbs went down there. And Gertrude had found them as well and ordered Stephanie to clean her. So with the help of Richard, Stephanie and him carried her up the stairs and gave her a warm, soapy bath and clean clothes, and then laid her in bed. It was at this point that Stephanie realized Sylvia wasn't breathing and attempted to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Gertrude said that Sylvia was faking it and started beating the shit out of her with a book to prove that it was fake while shouting "faker" over and over again. And when Sylvia didn't respond in any way, shape, or form, Gertrude began to panic. So Sylvia died on October 26th, 1965. She being Gertrude, told Richard to go to the nearest payphone and call the police. And when the police arrived at the house, Gertrude led them up to Sylvia's body and a soiled mattress. She told them that she had been doctoring the child for an hour before she passed and that she had ran away with local boys and returned that afternoon bare-breasted and holding a note. And the note was the one that Gertrude had forced Sylvia to write, saying that the local boys were the ones that were beating her. The police also questioned Paula Banazuski, who said that Sylvia's death was meant to happen, and told Jenny that if she wanted to live with them, they would treat her like their own sister. And then Gertrude also forced Jenny to give her a rehearsed version of the events as well. But very courageously, I might add, she whispered to the officers that if you get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything. So Jenny's formal statement to the police led to the arrest of Gertrude, Paula, Stephanie, and John Banazuski. And that same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also arrested. All were held in jail without bail, and Gertrude deflected all blame to her children and their boyfriends and denied involvement at all, which is fucking bananas, if you ask me. She was the root of all of it. And she's like, I didn't do it. It was all my kids. Good for you, sister. On October 29th, 3 days after Sylvia's death, the neighborhood kids, Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, and Judy Duke and Anna Cisco were arrested and charged with injury to a person, and each was released into custody of their parents under subpoena to appear as witnesses at trial. So I had talked about earlier where some of the neighborhood kids would come over to abuse Sylvia and see her strung up in the basement, and those were some of the kids that did. So Sylvia's autopsy report results are as follows. So she had burns, severe bruising, extensive muscle damage, extensive nerve damage. Her vaginal cavity was swollen shut from how bad it was beat. All fingernails were broken backwards. Most layers of skin on her face, breast, neck, and right knee had peeled off or receded. Sylvia had bitten through her lip so that her lip was separated from part of her face. And the official cause of death was listed as a subdural hematoma due to a severe blow to her right temple, which I can only assume was from the curtain rod. Shock due to severe damage to her skin along with malnutrition were also listed as factors that contributed to her murder, but the subdural hematoma was the main one. Sylvia's funeral was held on October 29th at the Russell and Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon, Indiana. The following year, on May 19th, 1966, after 8 hours of deliberation, Gertrude Baniszewski was found guilty of first-degree murder. Paula Baniszewski was found guilty of second-degree murder. Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard, and John Baniszewski were found guilty of manslaughter. And on May 25th, they were sentenced as follows. So Gertrude was sentenced to life. Paula was sentenced to life. And Richard, Coy, and John were sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison. Honestly, it doesn't seem like enough, I'll be honest. After everything this poor girl went through, it doesn't feel like enough. But in 1971, the Indiana Supreme Court granted Paula and Gertrude a new trial due to, and I quote, prejudicial atmosphere. Whatever the fuck that means. But Gertrude was again convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And then Paula pleaded guilty to lesser charges of manslaughter and only served 2 years in prison. And then the 3 boys were released in 1968 on good behavior after serving 2 years. So where is everybody now? In December of 1985, Gertrude was released on parole. She changed her name to Nadine Van Fossen and moved to Iowa, where she lived until she died from lung cancer on June 16th, 1990. Good riddance. Paula married and moved to a farm in Iowa. John became a lay minister in Texas and counseled children of divorced parents. And he died of diabetes on May 19th, 2005 at age 52. That's kind of funny because he died many years later, but he died on the same date, May 19th, as when he was convicted of manslaughter. So I think that's kind of poetic. Richard Hobbs died of cancer at the age 21 in 1972. Coy Hubbard remained in Indiana and was in prison multiple times before having a heart attack and dying at age 56 on June 23rd, 2007. And Stephanie dropped off the grid and assumed a new name. She ended up marrying and becoming a school teacher, and she had several children and was last known to reside in Florida. The injury to person charges against the neighborhood kids ended up being dropped, and Jenny, Sylvia's younger sister, died of a heart attack on June 23rd, 2004 at age 54 in Indiana. I'm kind of sad that she didn't outlive everybody, but you can only ask for so much, you know? So that is the extremely disturbing, heartbreaking story of 16-year-old Sylvia Likens and how she died, the abuse she suffered. She is the reason a lot of child laws are in place in Indiana now. So at least there is some kind of silver lining to her death. If you're interested in a movie that's loosely based off the events of Sylvia Likens, it's called An American Crime, and it was released in 2007. It has a bunch of well-known actors like Elliot Page, who plays Sylvia, Evan Peters plays Richard Hobbs, and Catherine Keener plays Gertrude. I haven't watched it, and I might watch it, but it'll be a while because after doing all this research for this story, I really can't. I don't think mentally I can watch that right now. Because if it's different, like reading about it versus seeing it and hearing it. Especially hearing it, I'm very auditory with things, so like I think hearing it would be too much. This was a really rough one. So thank you to everyone who got this far in the episode and didn't stop when I said this was your last and only warning. So thank you again for listening. I swear I will be back next week with something that doesn't make you want to peel off your own skin and pop out your eyeballs. It'll be chiller. Anyways, as usual, follow or subscribe on whatever streaming platform you guys are using to get notified when new episodes come out. I got a good one coming up next week, so I will see you all next Friday at midnight. Bye.